I'm Ben Meiselas from the MeidasTouch Network, and this is a breaking news alert. We are now learning that Republican Governor of Georgia, Brian Kemp, is officially testifying before the Fulton County Special Grand Jury, which is engaged in a criminal investigation of election interference by Trump and co-conspirators in the 2020 election. The special grand jury was officially impaneled at the request of the Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis on May 2nd of 2022. Other high-ranking Georgia officials who testified included Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State, who received the phone call by Donald Trump demanding that Raffensperger find him votes to try to overturn the free and fair election. Some of the other things the special grand jury is looking into is the fake elector scheme by Trump and others, whereby they caused fake elector slates within states like Georgia to submit their names instead of the actual electors who were voted on by the people. And so fraudulent and phony elector slates that would vote for Trump would be submitted to Vice President Pence to certify on January 6th instead of the actual electors. And when Pence said he wouldn't go along with that scheme, the insurrection was initiated to violently overthrow our government. And so Brian Kemp was initially subpoenaed on August 4th of 2022. And as it got closer to the date where Kemp was supposed to testify before the special grand jury, Kemp filed a motion to quash before the judge, Robert McBurney, who is overseeing the Fulton County special grand jury. And in the motion filed by Governor Kemp, Kemp asserted sovereign immunity. And basically what sovereign immunity says, it's a doctrine that a state, the sovereign, can't be sued unless the state consents to being sued and waives sovereign immunity. And the argument by Kemp was that he did not waive sovereign immunity here. And the argument back from the Fulton County District Attorney was a rather simple one. You can see the logical flaw in Governor Kemp's argument, which is that he's not being sued, and Kemp tried to construe what was taking place in the special grand jury as a civil proceeding where it's like a lawsuit, and the judge basically said, no, this is a criminal investigation. You're not being sued, and you don't get to invoke sovereign immunity here. You're going to have to testify. But then the judge turned to the next question of when should you have to testify, and because Governor Kemp was in a re-election race against Stacey Abrams, the judge said after the midterms, then you will be compelled to testify and you'll have to show up. And so following the midterms last week, a date was scheduled where Kemp would finally testify. And today, on Tuesday, November 15th, Brian Kemp is testifying. Now, what do we expect Brian Kemp to testify? Well, Brian Kemp and his Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, and the other state officials, Republican state officials who were not MAGA extremist-styled Republicans, had said it was a free and fair election. It was the most safe and secure election, 2020, in the history of Georgia, that there wasn't any irregularities or fraud that Trump was alleging, and there certainly wasn't any irregularities or fraud that could overturn the results of the election. And so Kemp, like Raffensperger, is aware of those efforts. And also, Governor Kemp is likely aware of the fake electors, because the fake electors and their scheme, those were MAGA extremist-style Republicans, and they are among the highest ranking Republican officials in Georgia, like legislators who are very, very, very well known in Georgia Republican political circles. Now, if you watch the other MeidasTouch Network update I did a little bit earlier last week, one of the arguments that those electors are making. They kind of threw Trump under the bus in a filing that they made a few days after the midterm elections. And they said, look, we only submitted our names as fake electors as a backup plan if Trump and Eastman, Trump's lawyer, John Eastman, if they succeeded in their litigation in the federal courts to challenge the election, and then we would be the backup plan. We didn't intend for our names to be submitted as the actual electors on January 6th if the courts ruled against Trump. And I commented in the video that I did about that, well, so you were okay with committing the crime at the outset, and then when you were aware the courts all ruled against Donald Trump, you still didn't do anything to withdraw your name as fake electors. Even on January 6th, as you saw a violent insurrection taking place, and knowing that it was possible that the names of you and your other fake electors would be submitted, at no point in time did you send an email or a letter or make a phone call saying, stop this immediately. We're not part of this. We are not the actual electors. We formally withdraw. You didn't. You waited for there to be a violent overthrow of our government and a coup and the appointment of Trump as an emperor and dictator. That's what you did. And so that's what those fake electors argued last week in a motion that they filed with the judge. And they were filing that motion in connection with a procedural motion to disqualify their lawyer filed by the Fulton County District Attorney, saying there was a conflict of interest with all of those electors, or pretty much 9 or 11 of them, being represented by the same exact lawyer. And the reason that those fake electors posited that argument is to say that they're innocent and there's no real criminal liability, and so there's no risk of the getting around the prisoner's dilemma where they're all basically coordinating their defense with the same lawyer, even though there's a conflict of interest where those electors may want to provide information and turn on each other. So they argued that there really is no chance that they're going to be found guilty, or they're still entitled to a presumption of innocence, such that there shouldn't be a motion to disqualify their lawyer. But in any event, there will likely be questions to Governor Kemp about those fake electors, what he knows about that scheme, and then generally what he knows about all the other mischief and crimes committed in his state, because he spoke to a lot of people. He was aware of the illegality that Trump was committing. I mean, to be fair to Governor Kemp, and look, I'm not a big fan of Republican Governor Kemp, but he is on the scale of MAGA extremists to more moderate Republicans. He tends to tilt on the more moderate Republican side. And to be fair to him, he was good with certifying the election results in 2020 and did not say that there was fraud or anything in the state. And I think he can testify to that. And I think that will be powerful testimony there. So Brian Kemp testifying today. What happens next? Who else will be testifying? We should look forward to Mark Meadows having to testify. Mark Meadows had filed objections in South Carolina, trying to avoid his local court from compelling him to testify in Georgia. If you watch the MeidasTouch network, you're aware that if you're trying to compel out-of-state people to show up in connection with criminal investigations, there's something called a uniform subpoena code, where one state has to first find basically probable cause or make a finding that someone's a material witness. Then you have to go into the local state court and compel them to testify. And so Mark Meadows was compelled to testify from his home state court of South Carolina. Newt Gingrich tried to avoid testifying in Virginia, and he was compelled to testify from his home court in Virginia into the Fulton County grand jury. And of course, Lindsey Graham, South Carolina senator, tried to avoid testifying, filed a federal lawsuit, took it up all the way to the Supreme Court and lost. He was arguing that under the speech and debate clause of the Constitution, which states that members of Congress and senators can't be questioned outside of their roles as senators and members of Congress. In essence, the Constitution gives them an immunity where they can't be questioned, where they can't be sued, where they can't be hauled into a court for legitimate legislative activity. And what the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, the District Court, and eventually the Supreme Court, by denying Lindsey Graham's appeal, all essentially agreed to it's not legitimate legislative activity for Lindsey Graham to engage in threatening conduct of Brad Raffensperger and state officials to overturn free and fair elections. It's not legitimate legislative activity for Lindsey Graham to work and coordinate efforts with a campaign like the Trump campaign, so those efforts are fair game. And legitimate legislative activities have never consisted of statements made to the press, and so all of that is fair game for Lindsey Graham to be questioned. So that's what I'm looking forward to. Lindsey Graham being questioned, Mark Meadows being questioned, Newt Gingrich being questioned, and of course, Brian Kemp today being questioned. So the wheels of justice now turn quicker after the quiet period of the midterm elections has concluded. I think we'll still see it move slower than we would like because of the runoff elections in Georgia for the senator race. But other than that, I think the wheels of justice will start moving quickly. We'll start getting a lot more legal updates in Georgia with the DOJ, with Letitia James's, New York AG's civil case against Trump. A lot of moving pieces. We'll, of course, cover it all here on the MeidasTouch Network, and we'll make sure that we show you the legal filings so you know that everything we're saying is based on what the court documents say. I'm Ben Meiselas from the MeidasTouch Network. Hit the subscribe button now. It's free to subscribe. We're on our way to 1 million subscribers thanks to your incredible support. So please hit the subscribe button now. Also, consider joining Patreon at MeidasTouch. It's patreon.com/MeidasTouch. Consider becoming a patron. We're not funded by any outside investors at all, so none of the big investors who fund the both sides media and the pro-fascist media. We rely only on you. So if you can, consider it. Go to patreon.com/MeidasTouch, patreon.com/MeidasTouch, and you can join wherever you are in the world. And whenever you ask, what can you do? No pressure if you can't, but if you can join one of those subscriptions, it goes a long way to help build this network. Until next time, I'm Ben Meiselas.
MeidasTouch is unapologetically pro-democracy. And look, we know you are too. So please make sure you check out our best-selling shirt and our best-selling gear, the unapologetically pro-democracy gear. And hey, while you're at it, make sure you check out my favorite shirt and one of our most famous designs. It wasn't rigged, you're just a loser. At store.meidastouch.com. That's store.meidastouch.com.